Now, let's go back to my mind map, and here it is. Ta-da. Oh, it is here, but just. By the way, I'm a little bit clumsy with this laptop because I'm used to very. Okay, it's 118. Okay, here we go. If you recall, okay, let's recall from the first time we met. We're talking about cognitive human factor in design, right? And we walk backward. I walk you guys backward from design. Why do you even have the word design? Because there's this balance between form and functionality, right? We talk about this form functionality duality, right? At the extreme end, just pure form, something pretty, right? And the other end is pure function, right? Engineering solution, very mechanical, doesn't have to look pretty, it just has to work. But somewhere in the middle, there's a degree of freedom. Not all function has to be fulfilled by the same form, okay? So that's when you have a degree of freedom to design, right? Sometimes you design to make the function works better. So it's more efficient, better, less waste. Sometimes you design it so that it achieves a secondary objective, like it's pretty, it looks nice. It's something that while you're not using it, it looks nice on the shelf, right? And finally, you have this design consideration where you think of the indirect impact, things that happen as a consequence of that machinery or that operation. So this is very important for sustainability. And like I emphasize for you guys, sustainability thinking is not an optional. It's actually like, you know, it should be at least 10% of your thinking in everything you do. Okay. Now I have to admit, part of the reason is that people of my generation, we didn't think of sustainability in maybe even 1% of what we did. So that's why, you know, the honor is unto you. But, you know, there's no point for you to stand up and say, oh, well, you know, the old generation left the world in a big mess, so I'm just going to do the same thing. No, no, no. It's now your world. It's now your world. Okay. Right. So we talk about this. So design, right? So what's cognitive human factor? Well, what it means is that you're trying to apply the factor you know about human cognitive process to the design. For some objective, again, some of the objective would be if you are designing a communication package, okay? You design it so that the communication is more efficient, right? If you are designing something that's already achieving its job, you want it to have a nice appearance or have a secondary value in terms of aesthetics, okay? Then you can do that. Then you have to appeal to the principle, what makes something aesthetic in humans' eyes, right? Humans' eyes. Now, you guys know this, right? Why are people good looking? Usually, it's first of all, people are good looking because they look a little bit like statistical average. Okay, so I'm just making a segue into a discussion about aesthetic. Okay, I'm making a segue about aesthetics. Why are people good looking? You know, what they did. This is very interesting. In the early day of digitization, well, not really early day. Yeah, maybe. They wanted to know what makes people criminal, right? So they take a snapshot of maybe 300 criminals in the jail, all right? Guys, men. And they take a photo average of it. It turns out very good looking, okay? So that's one cognitive human factor. We respond to things that we are familiar with. And one of the reasons we're familiar with this kind of face is because we are acclimatized to it, right? If you see a lot of K-pop's actors or whatever, right? It's no wonder you think that K-pop actors are good looking. You take the same guy to maybe some culture who hasn't been exposed by 1,000, 10,000 of hours of K-pop, they would not think this is good looking because it's not familiar to them. Oh, I haven't, right? Okay, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'll let you do it. Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is symmetry, right? If you want to know how good looking you are in a priori sense, take a picture of yourself, split it in half, flip left to right, right to left, and see it's the same person. If you look very much like yourself when you are artificially symmetricized or make symmetric, you're pretty good looking to the opposite sex. Okay, and that has evolutionary advantage because people who are symmetric means as your gene is expressed, you are not being bothered by pathogens. Okay, so chances are you're healthy, you make stronger offspring or whatnot. So natural selection prefers symmetry in a human face, for example. So these are just my little segue into understanding of human aesthetics, right? But the idea here is you utilize this. This is your knowledge. And what's the use of this class? Is two things, right? As a creator, you use it to your advantage. As a consumer, you know when it's being used against you, right? You know when it's being used against you. Why is it that say, let's say I don't know if this is true, but let's say the government of Korea wants to export their culture. What they do is they innate facial profile, and Korean people look very different. But if they send all kind of Korean face, people are not going to be able to acclimatize. So they select a particular face type in Korea and just make sure all the K-pop guys look the same, and that acclimatizes you. Okay. So occasionally they don't look the same, but let's see. So these are little trickeries that could be mobilized or used against you. Now, so this class then talks about the human cognitive factor, right? Not so much about design because that's your application side. Now, in my module, which is where I'm with you, we are going to the module that say application now. But it's not application in design in general. So hence the subject of my module is cognitive human factor in design, right? But not, let me make it a little bigger. Okay. In design of visualization and data analytics. Okay. In particular. And in terms of presentation and communication in general. Okay, so this is about specialization of how we would use cognitive human factor in design, but not design of product, a physical product. Okay, but design of two things. One is visualization media. The other one is data analytics media. Actually, they're both visualization, but I make the data analytics separate. You understand why. Okay. It also has to do with your generation. And this, in turn, is part of the communication strategy. And communication is a broad thing. So so think of it this way. Communication, right? Within communication, there's the area of presentation. So presentation is a tool for communication. And within that presentation tool set, I'm going to focus on visualization and visualizing data, right? And with that, the reason that you're going to also be introduced to the Mathematica application is because you're now going to learn how to do it yourself, right? So you could actually do some kind of visualization. Now, not much, right? But just to show you that we have the tools to do that. Okay, so that's the deal. So let's go to slide 2. Now, for those of you who are keen, you'll notice this is not exactly PowerPoint, right? Because with PowerPoint, it's not very conducive to do things like, hiding a topic or whatever, okay? So this is actually a slide that's written in the Mathematica document. So it's more flexible. So we'll get to that. Okay. Right. Now pay attention, and this is something that you have to think about it conceptually. Conceptually. This is called the long arc of cognitive human media. Okay. Notice I separate the, I take out the word factor, I put in the word media, right? So media is just a plural of medium. Okay. So this is the long arc of cognitive human media. First thing. Okay. First thing, pointing. Okay. Pointing. Now, normally when I point, human response is to look at where I'm pointing. Okay. Okay. So I'm pointing this way. Everybody's looking. Why is that significant? Well, that's obviously significant for human evolution, right? We evolved to hunt and survive and protect each other. So if I'm pointing to a threat, there's a lion coming, you know, there's a woolly mammoth, everybody should be looking in the same direction. Fine. That's not media, right? Because I'm using my finger. Okay. So pointing. Okay. Now this is interesting. In non-human, we also have pointing. Okay. In non-human. So by the way, the slides here has all the external links. So when I give it to you, you guys can go and chase up. Not all animals respond to pointing. In fact, you can't point. You can't point for reptiles, for example. I don't think you can. But in mammals, sometimes you can. Not all mammals. So chimpanzee, yes. Elephant, yes. Okay. But some lower primates, maybe some small, I don't know, mouse. You don't point to something and the mouse would point, right? It's ironic. You use the mouse to point. Okay, so that's not media. What's not good about media? Okay. When it's not media, what's not good about it? Well, it takes a human being to point, right? And gets a little bit tiring, all right? So think of a first, I want you to think, now it's already on the screen, so you don't have to think very much. Think of what it means to have pointing as a medium. In other words, mediated pointing. Sign, right? As long as the road sign is up, it's pointing something. Now, in this case, it's not pointing to immediate danger, but it's pointing to direction to Rome or something. Now, I don't have to be there to point because the sign keeps pointing. So that's one thing good about medium, right? It stays. Okay. So all of this, and hold on. I don't like the small screen, but there it is. Okay. For example, go to the history of traffic sign. That's very good. This goes all the way from, I think, Rome, I think. Right. History of sign goes all the way from Rome to antiquity and so forth. And human beings are bellicose species, meaning we like to fight. So it's no wonder that the sign is taken from arrow. Arrow is from hunting and fighting, right? So history of traffic sign. So this is the birth of mediated. Okay. So once you have media, you have to take into account cognitive factor. Well, in fact, even if without media, you know, when I'm pointing, I can take for granted that human beings will look. That implicitly already takes into account human or Homo sapiens ability or response to pointing. So I cannot do this for lower primates. I can do this with chimpanzee and elephant. Okay. And dogs, I think. But cats, I'm not quite sure. Cat only responds to actual target. So if you point laser, it's looking at the laser. It's not looking at your pointing. Okay. So this is the birth of what's called icons and semiotics. You guys know what the difference between those two are? Well, semiotics is just the study of sign. Okay. Icon perhaps is a specialization. So it's not just a sign, but it's also a symbol. So you guys know that, so I mean, I don't have to explain to you what icon in iPhone is, right? Now, if you notice, it does have a function, right? And the thing I was saying to you guys last time completely applies, right? Facebook has icon, Instagram has icon, Twitter has icon, right? But to perform the function of an icon, all it has to do with is make sure there's a T, right? And W maybe, okay? But instead of doing that, let's do it symbolically with a little bird that tweets, okay? So right there is taking advantage of the degree of freedom design. So you're not just saying that this is a logo for Twitter, but this is a logo for Twitter that symbolizes what Twitter does, okay? Human beings as little birds, passing on little gossips and comments and so forth, right? So that's a good example, okay? So all this is already coming in. Now, I want to highlight a few things, or cave art. So, you know, we can go this in non-human. So I'm going to, so that's a little bit going too far back. Now, let's move a little bit closer, okay? So what are the media? Well, we can think of what's called mortal or spoken language. Now, do you guys know about this? In some tribes in Africa, right? They have what's called oral tradition, okay? So let's say you have a tribe of maybe 30 people. One of you, at a very young child, okay, will be told the story, history of your tribe. Your job is to be a human media. So you can remember all the history that ever happened to your tribe in the past 500 years. Okay, that's your job. That's your job. That's you don't have to go hunting or anything. Likewise, when you get older, you have to recruit your successor, right? Now, oral tradition, you can think that, well, it's a little bit fragile. You think it's fragile or not so fragile? Well, sometimes it's actually less fragile. Okay, good example would be the Buddhist scripture. Buddhist scripture, before it was written down, it was rehearsed. So by consensus, it's not like you're writing, say the Buddha said something and somebody writes down and then you make a copy of that. And there's always like a copying or translation or, you know, because it's one person, right? It's a scribe, what's called a scribe. So there's a mistranslation, miswriting, and so forth. Whereas with Buddhist scripture, this was sort of like collectively chanted by a community. So if everybody says, you know, the Buddha said this, and one guy said that, it kind of stands out. In fact, that's the purpose of making sort of like sonorous. There's a disharmony when you say something wrong, okay? So that's sort of like a redundancy built into system. So that's why for hundreds of years, Buddhist scripture is very reliably translated. Now, I would argue that today, even more reliable because it's in digital media, you can trace. But for a while, when Buddhist scripture was written down, that point was a little bit fragile because you can actually have wrong translation. And it's only one copy, right? And you know about this, Tang Samjiang, when to get the translation in Chinese and all that. So oral tradition is one of those things, okay? So that's human cognitive media. The fact that you work on human consensus is also, in a way, reflexive of cognitive capability of human beings. Now, it may not be something that you're familiar with because for you to remember like, you know, thousands of words of scripture, that sounds like a unnatural thing to you, okay? But that's only because you were born in the generation where you were outsourcing the memory into a medium. So the fact that you didn't have this media of memory in your head, but you have it in a digital form, it gives you a different mindset. So the cognitive factor of you today and cognitive factor of, say, Buddhist student of Buddhism 1,000 year ago or 2000 years ago are very different, right? So if you were to design a curriculum for teaching Buddhism today, you wouldn't rely on oral memory, right? You wouldn't, right? You would actually have maybe even diagrams and whatnot. And when we do that, we see that lots of modern monks use, you know, PowerPoint and arrows and diagram and you know, maybe Tableau and whatnot, right? Okay, so that is saying, well, same message, but it takes into account the audience is different. Okay, so oral tradition is something very good to read about. What else? What about tattoos? You guys know what tattoo is, right? Well, tattoo has a very long tradition. Again, I'll just give example of, you know, Buddhist case because that's kind of like easy reference for a lot of you. Buddhist scripture sometimes is, you know, think of it this way. Let's say I'm a monk. I have a student. He's not very smart. He can't really memorize, but he gets around. Okay, so if I write some things on his back, he gets around, he spread the message, right? So he's actually useful. So tattoos are a little bit like that. It is using the human media to spread the words. Now, a lot of time the word is not, say, like a Buddhist scripture. A word is an identity of that person. And that is the use of tattoo you are familiar with today. Okay, so the tattoo, you're not familiar with, you know, I'm making a tattoo of Buddhist scripture so I can spread the message. No, that's not the thing. Okay, usually you just have something that is personal to you. I love my mom or something like that or whatever. Okay, so what you're communicating is a personal identity. But still, it is a media. It is a media. It is subject to design. And everything that has to do with human cognitive design applies here. Okay. For example, do you want, okay, let's think of this way. Let's say you want to put a tattoo so you can attract attention to yourself. Right? Do you want your tattoo to be bold so that you can recognize what the picture is from 20 feet away? Or do you want something more intricate so that the person looks at it, wants to come and talk to you about it, or if that person wants to look at the tattoo, has to come within a speaking distance? That is human cognitive factor. Now, let me give another segue into what happened last week. All of you guys were doing a project, right? For Ajahn Sorashai, and he's very kind. He's a you know, very kind, make comment. But all of you fail on one thing. Guess what it is? You fail on empathy. Because you have, okay, you have something even much smaller than this. Okay, much smaller than this. All the concept that you have in your project is packed into a very nice pictogram or whatever in one shot. That works if you're looking at it and you want to get the information and you have an iPad in front of you, and that's for your purpose. Were you handing out iPad to everyone? No, you were doing this, right? So if I have a font that's this big, well, that's a little bit exaggeration, but let's say something like this, completely readable as a tablet, right? Can somebody in the back read it? Right? So even though, yeah, you were doing a good project, and I think I was quite impressed, by the way. Some of you, I really want to comment, but I didn't make, you know, live comments. But some of you did a really good job, okay? But all of you make a presentation like this, okay? Pretty much all of you. So can anyone in the back get any message, any benefit from it? No, right? Because even though you are young, you can't see that small, okay? So that's not taking cognitive human factor into into consideration. So you lack empathy there. Now, before I accuse all of you of lacking empathy, I also lack empathy. When I use, you see that I use mind map and I switch back and forth a lot. I don't rehearse that. So as a result, your mind cannot grasp. Well, I'm jumping all over the place. Okay. So when I jump all over the place, that's me not really caring so much about what happened in your brain because I know you can't follow. But it's just for me to jump from one material to the next. I pull in this file, I go there and here and there. So that's not meant for you. Okay. If this was a rehearsed, like a presentation, you should never do that. Okay. You can skip from file to file, but it should be well coordinated. Now, I didn't go through the trouble of coordinating that during class. So you see that my slides sometimes jump to the application back and forth because I don't have that, I'm not demonstrating a good example of empathy in that case. Okay. Right. So that's about language, right? Now I'm going to go a little bit. Now, here's where we start to get to our case in point, right? Remember, I'm going to talk about communication, presentation, visualization, data analytics, right? I'm not going to make all the presentation about data analytics or visualization through, I don't know, performance art, right? I'm not doing a modern dance interpretation of algebra, for example, right? So I'm not doing anything in 3D. So think about this. 98% perhaps, I'm just throwing a number here, 98% of cognitive human media that you are exposed to, working with, influenced by, will come in the form of stackable rectangles. And this, if there's one thing I want you to remember for the rest of your life, because I think it does apply for the rest of your life, is that your world is dominated by communication through stackable rectangles. Okay, so what do I mean by rectangles? That's a rectangle. What do I mean by stackable? You have pages of it. Okay, so the earliest form of that is Sumerian tablet. So Sumerian tablet, if I ask you, what's earliest form in humanity of stackable rectangle? That's certainly Sumerian tablet. You guys know what that is, right? Are you familiar with that? No? Okay. Well, I give you the link. I don't have time to click to it, but so. Yeah. So that's okay. So cuneiform, that's the earliest form of writing. Okay. You may be more familiar with papyrus. That's the earliest form of paper, right? So that's Egyptian papyrus. Okay. Now let's move more to modern form. What else can you think of as stackable rectangle? Billboard is a stackable rectangle. Okay. Now again, part of the Basai liberal arts education is you can think abstract form, right? So to me or to you, the screen that you're looking at and the billboard you're driving by, does it have common element? Yes. Right? Right? Now, is it rectangular? Yes. Is it stackable? Yes, because they can change the message. In fact, before you have digital, you have this thing that's kind of like a triangular column. Have you ever seen that? No? It's like a rectangle, right? But instead of having the whole poster, you have column of cylinder that's like a triangle shape. And every 10 seconds, it rotates. Every 10 seconds, it rotates. So it actually has a 3-page display. That's before digital, right? Now with digital, you can have gazillion page, right? But you just have 1 page. In 1 month, they change it. So that's another, so it's all stackable. What else? Well, book, right? Book is a classical example of a stackable rectangle. Okay, how do you stack it? From page to page. Now, this is where you come in. Non-interactive digital media. This is what you grew up on. You don't realize this, but you actually technologically took a step backward from my generation in one regard. I'll tell you why. When you go to class, and this is from high school on, what is the single most used teaching medium? PowerPoint. What's a PowerPoint? It's a stackable rectangle. Is it interactive? It's not. Now, just because you can go back and forth between pages doesn't mean that makes it interactive. You can flip the books, right? The book is not interactive. It's completely static. But you go from page this and you go back and forth. That's you. That's you moving back and forth. The medium is completely static. Okay? Now, let me contrast that with the teaching medium I grew up with. Teacher, packed full of knowledge, walks in with a book under his arm, presumably a book that he wrote, because he's very proud of it, and a piece of chalk, or maybe just empty hand. Writes everything interactively from scratch, from the narrative. So I ask you, which one is more high-tech? PowerPoint or chalkboard? Well, you would think that PowerPoint is more high-tech, right? It uses computer, right? And it does graphic. But actually, in terms of interactivity, it's a step backward. Right? You don't realize this. I don't know if you realize this. When I was growing up, if I was, say, taking a class in physics, the professor would derive, say, a Hamiltonian or Schrodinger's equation pretty much from his head on the spot. And as he's doing it, I absorb a lot more because I'm actually going through him. You know, I'm following his chalk movement. So this is differential equation, this wave equation is moving, is that. So it's actually, to me, you know, a lot of students prefer to have, for every class, some kind of PowerPoint handout or something. That's just being lazy, because when you want to review, you can do that, right? You should be writing the PowerPoint. Because when you write a PowerPoint, you are summarizing the points and you are linearizing the narrative. Okay, the teacher shouldn't do that for you. Now, I make an exception because I also am professional. Again, I only became academic, you know, a few years full-time. I spent my career mostly in the commercial and the policy sector, right? So I have written literally hundreds and hundreds of PowerPoints myself. I don't like to write it for students or in class, but I use it for my projects. I use it for my consultation. I use it for my presentation. You know why? You know why I like to use presentation? Not for class, but for my project, when I sell consultancy project, or basically when I make money. Anybody? My audience becomes captive and linearized. In other words, I control the narrative. I go to my client, I say, okay, hello, this is who I am, blah, blah, blah. Slide number 3, this is your problem. Slide number 4, these are solutions that my competitors try to say. Slide number 5, they all suck. Slide number 6, what's really cool is this. Slide number 7, aha, guess who has that technology? Right? It's a linearized narrative, very captive. So it is a good marketing tool in a way. It's a good marketing tool. Yeah. I don't like it as a teaching tool. It makes your mind artificially linear. So chalkboard. Now this, when I put a blue thing around it, that means I'm narrowing down to my focus now. Okay. So this is what I'm going to be focusing on. interactive digital media. Okay, digital media. And so in my class, well, I'm already using mind map. Okay, you should get used to that. But I'm going to teach you what's called a computable document format. That is, you can see that this thing I already, can hide details and whatever. So it's already, in a way, responding to my narrative. I can go, it's not just going back and forth. I can hide detail, I can show detail, but I can do a lot more than that because I can do live computation. Okay. So for example, I'm just going to make a very quick example. Let's say I want to teach you guys about, I don't know, sine wave, right? So I can do this, plot sine x, say, x from -3 to 3 or something like that. I don't know. Oops, bracket. Okay, so this is already very interactive. This is how I'm, okay. Now, what else can I do? Well, I don't want it to just go from 3 to 4. I can, well, I can make it higher frequency. So I put something like this, multiplier. Hey. Oh, sorry. Why am I not sharing? So I have not been sharing at all. Okay, guys, you are an adult now. Control your bowel movement to the break. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to get you Pampers. No, I didn't say it's a break now. I was saying that control your bowel movement till the break. Not that right now is a break, although it's a good time for break. Is it, do we break? 2:30 break, okay. So for example, I have to add here. Okay, so you can see this now. I know, being adult sucks. When you were kids, you can just pee in your pants and your parents will come and clean up. But nowadays you have to sort of like plan your toilet breaks around it. Okay, so for example, I can do this. I can add parameter A and I say something like A between, I don't know, 3 and 9 and okay, something like this, right? Okay, so now I can do this, right? Now, is this something that you need to do because you're teaching mathematics? No, of course not. And in fact, the example to the later class, I will show you an example of pure design. Okay, so but this is sort of like right away. That's a difference between this and let's say PowerPoint. Okay, it's even better than chalkboard, right? Because if I were to teach you, let's say I'm pretending I'm teaching you a sine wave, right? And I have to draw this in a chalkboard. I have to draw it, and the student asked me, "What if it's higher frequency?" So I have to erase it and then draw a higher one, right? But with this, I can do that and say, "Okay, this is what high frequency, this is what low frequency, and so forth." Okay, so this is interactive digital media. Okay, so forget about PowerPoint. That's when you were a kid. Okay, this is where you go forward now. Do your bar side now, your proper bar side. Okay, now the tools will be different. Okay, some of the tools will be like maybe from SketchUp. I don't know, but this happened to be the one that I use. The reason I use this is because it does visualize it. It doesn't just do visualization. It does a whole lot more that I do. So it's one platform that I do for everything. So this is what I mean by interactive digital media. It's digital because, and it's basically in a form of rectangle. But this is not stackable rectangle because it's interactive, right? This is not one page to the next. It's not like I have one page like this, and then next page like that, and next page like that. This is literally on the go. Okay? And this, I argue, is what best resonates with human cognitive capabilities. Okay? This is what resonates with human cognitive capability in your generation. So this is sort of like the best of both worlds. It's interactive like a chalkboard, but it's also, doesn't require me to wash my hand afterward and doesn't. So it's quite nice. So I do this. So this is what I used to teach, say, whatever, data analytics. Okay. So that's the world that you will be operating in. Okay. So the link is here. You can read that, but we'll come back to it. Now, okay, so that's the long arc of cognitive human being from cognitive human media, from pointing all the way to very static, stackable rectangles to something interactive. Once you go to the world interactive, then everything else is a game, is on the card, right? So metaverse, this is interactive. Metaverse, the difference between metaverse and watching a Pixar movie is that Pixar movie, you are passive, you're completely passive, right? It's very nice 3D animation, but you don't interact with it like in a game. Forget metaverse, just 3D games. Okay, it's completely interactive. Okay, so that complete interactivity is what people from this generation requires now. So it's not just 2D, it's not just text, people require picture. It's not just picture in 2D, people require realistic 3D picture. It's not just realistic 3D picture, people now require or demand interactivity. Okay, so that's what I mean by cognitive human factor of this generation going forward. Okay, you have to be able to play in the interactive digital media. Yeah, otherwise, what's the point of being a Basai student, right? Okay, you don't know sine wave better than engineering student or math student. Okay, but you know how to bring sine wave to life. That's what makes you different. Okay, let me say that again. You don't understand sine wave better than math or engineering student, but by doing something just like right now, you can bring sine wave to life. You can bring it as part of your design element. That is what makes you, Basai, different from presumably other curriculum. Okay, good. Now, so we talk about this long arc, basically sort of like long arc of human development and how humanity plays with media. Now I want to start on a subject called dimensionality. What do I mean by dimensionality? Well, you know about 1D, 2D, 3D, right? That's basically it. Okay, I'm going to talk about dimensionality. So let's talk about one dimension. If I were to tell you something about one dimension in cognitive media, you can think, if you're a mathematics student, you know that when I say one dimension, what I mean is what? A number line, right? Right? Number line, right? Something that from left to right. But in terms of media, what is the dimension that you have to work with? The one dimension you work with? Time. Okay, so if you think about it, physicists work in X, Y, and Z coordinate, right? And time becomes a fourth dimension. But in any other area, when you're talking about, you're only talking about place and time, right? And place is 3D, but in terms of narrative, it's always time. Okay, I don't know if you guys are movie buff, but you know, some of the more interesting artistic movie have a very non-linear time. So the first thing you have to recognize is linearity versus non-linearity. Okay, have you guys watched a movie that starts from the beginning to end? Have you guys ever watched a movie that chose the end and then say 3 weeks ago? Right? And you guys ever watch a movie called Mulholland Drive? It's a cult classic. It's completely non-linear. It's just completely back and forth and nobody can understand anything. So the first thing you have to understand when it comes to cognitive human media is, how does time play? Most of the time, you play with linear time. Most of the time. Sometimes for shock value or whatever, you don't. For example, a good example would be trailer. A movie itself may be linear or not linear, but the trailer of the movie, that's the non-linear snippets from the movie, right? When you see shots from the trailer, does it guarantee to go from beginning to end? No, it doesn't. And nowadays you have super trailer, right? There's a little bit like a half a second trailer of a trailer, which in turn is a non-linear snippet from the movie, which in turn can be a non-linear narrative. So all this has to enter your head as you are designing, whatever it is. It has to be the first thing you think about is linearity, non-linearity, order of time. Okay, you have to make that decision. And again, why do I use PowerPoint to sell consultancy project? Because I completely linearize the story. Okay. And I want to do that because I want to start with them realizing that they need this to the end where I provide this, right? So that's the one dimension. The one dimension you have to think of. Now, let's think in terms of actual medium itself. So let's think of two media. Okay, so there is this thing called two-dimensional. So that's the stackable, right? Right? That's a stackable screen. Okay? Stackable screen. Second, it's two-dimensional, but it's a picture of three-dimensional. So it's two-dimension, but it's picture of three-dimension. And then there's two-dimension, and then it's 3D animation. So you're watching 2D, this thing changes with time. So literally, how many dimensions are you watching? Anybody? 2 plus 1, right? X and Y plus 1. Except the illusion is X, Y, Z plus time. Okay, so this is actually two medium. Okay, now you can have three medium, right? Three-dimensional medium. What's the example of that? Sculpture, right? Sculpture is a three-dimensional media. Okay, what about three-dimensional virtual? I said 3 plus because you can add sound and voice. Well, I don't know. You ever watch Star Wars, right? So this is my generation. When I was growing up, this was a big deal. Princess Leia. You guys know what Princess Leia is or no? Maybe Star Wars is my thing, but Princess Leia was projected as a 3D hologram with a voice. So it's a 3D because it's projected in 3D space. It's virtual because you really can't grab her, but it's 3 plus because we actually have voice. Okay. What else? You can do three-dimensional, but like stage. So you can hear sound, okay? You can also have two-dimensional with immersion. And this would be something like, you know, virtual reality, and you guys are familiar with, okay? So this is the dimensionality of media. Why do I go through the trouble of delineating all this? Because the design tools, not the appreciation. The appreciation may be similar. You know, you're watching a screen. The screen is 3D picture, 2D picture, 3D animation, 3D with sound. You kind of like watching the screen. But in terms of production, all this use very different tool set. And you can say, I am a specialist in 2+D animation. I am a specialist in virtual 3D hologram generation. This becomes extremely technical. Okay, so in terms of design, you might just make a loose statement like, wouldn't it be nice if I have Princess Leia come and project it as a 3D? But in terms of execution, that means a difference between, you know, something you can knock up in the afternoon and something that you need to hire professional from Hollywood to do or whatever. Okay, so bear that in mind. Everything has cost. So this would be something like you have to bear in mind in terms of production costs. Okay. Now, finally, the other element of cognitive media is the thing that I'm going to emphasize, interactivity. Okay. So I make non-interactive, right? You have static display, you have motion or animation, and you have dynamic display. Do you guys know what a non-interactive dynamic display is? Any of you seen that? Come on. You guys have, when you were interviewing with me, you were very creative and you have all this kind of projects and summer camp and all that. Whatever happened to all that? Come on, guys. In your portfolio, you look pretty impressive when you were interviewing with me. What happened? Well, what about dynamic art, right? You seen that, right? Some, I don't know who, but you know, some of you maybe participate in a summer art project where you do a mobile art. So it's a sculpture that blows with the wind or something like that. I don't know. When you were interviewing with me, you were very impressive. Okay. Anyway, you know, like I don't know, I don't know who or what, or maybe I'm just imagining this, but sculptured art, right? You can have mobile art that blows with the wind, right? Some student did the project where the color changes with the quality of the air or something like that. Very dynamic. So it's a display, maybe it's a display of the air quality in Bangkok. And it is dynamic because it's not pre-programmed, right? It's not scripted. It's live, actually. It's when the air is dirty in Pathum Wan, when air is clean in Din Dang, it shows us different colors, it's moving and so forth. Very dynamic, very interesting project. Maybe not. Okay. Now, opposite end of that, maybe you have something like live action. Now, I'm not going to go over this. This would be something like, well, right now it's like live action. A comedy show would be live action. Sometimes, you know, the stand-up comedian asks, hey, where are you from? Okay, fine. You from Detroit? Oh, Detroit, what a rat or whatever. Okay, so it becomes a joke. And so that's interactivity. At the extreme end is a live performance, live media, and live service. What, you familiar with live service, right? When you go to chatbot, that's a live service. Okay, the answer may be pre-programmed, but the course of the dialogue is completely live, even though it's not that interesting. ChatGPT, for example, would be considered in this kind of live service, live dialogue. Okay, and then you have something called delay feedback, and this is what you guys are addicted to, right? Social media, e-commerce, and chat room. So there's an interactivity, but there's an option to delay. So you can maybe read your friend's response, but don't respond back or whatever. Now, I'm not going to focus on any of that. I'm going to focus on the blue one. And the blue one is interactivity through user control. Okay? User control. So there are two kind of user control. One's kind of like menu driven. So this would be the apps. And the other one is like control panel. So this is something that you can start playing with. So what I was showing right now, just now with the sine wave, that's called a control panel. Okay. It's taken from physical panel. You used to have this kind of engineering panel like this. And then you have little knobs. You can move things around. Okay, that's called control panel. Well, that simulate that in digital form. So just now, when I was doing the sine wave, right? You can see there's a little handle. It's not a real handle, but when you click on it, it's as if you're grabbing the handle and you slide. It's called slider. Okay. So those are the tools that I'm going to be teaching you. Okay. Those are the two I'm going to be teaching you. Now, okay. So with that, okay, let's take a 5-minute bathroom break and come back at 20, a little bit early. Okay,ครับ โอเคติดตามเพื่อนหน่อยลูก Okay, I'm gonna go over this part fairly quickly. Okay. Bye. Okay, Cup. Welcome to the second half of this class on cognitive human factor in the design of visualization and data analytics, in particular, and communication and presentation in general. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more of a conceptual presentation before we go to the live exercise, as it were, right? Okay. Okay, so on communication, what do you need to know about communication? Well, I put here in bracket. By the way, I'm now going to use essentially it's the same thing here, but instead of having linearized, right? Like I told you, this is my mimicry of what a slide would look like. So linear from one slide to the next, okay? But this would be more of what I prefer, which is more interactive, okay? So let's say we're gonna talk about essence of communication, okay? Now, this is not a communication art program, so I'm gonna put this in the bracket, right? I'm gonna put this in bracket. This is a communication theory. What makes for effective communication? So I'm not going to cover that, right? This is not a class. But what I'm going to do is cover a little bit about what's called communication topology, okay? Now, this is very important, okay? Because it directly impacts your design consideration. Now, think back of what I said earlier about what you did last week. Last week, you were doing what? Presentation, right? Now, let's say presentation is not interactive, but you're presenting your finding, you're presenting your pitch, you're presenting. So that's what? That's you. Okay. How many of you are there? One. How many people are listening? Many. So it's an example of one-to-many communication. Okay. So that, for example, that's one topology you're working with. And because that one-to-many, that many is not just 5, but 50 students, some of which are sitting way back. And your mode of communication is a rectangle in front of the class. You have to think of whether or not the one in the back can read the font. You see what I mean? So that's exactly what I mean by being aware of the design parameter. Okay. You are using a stackable rectangle to communicate in a one-to-many topology. But that many is not 5 people up front, but 50 people all the way to the back. And you want people all the way to the back to be able to read what's on the screen. So small font just won't cut it. Okay. So I'm going to go very quickly. Now, I'm not going to give you example of all of them. So there's one-to-one, which is personal. There's one-to-one with one-way anonymity. There's one-to-one. I'll give you an example, okay? Now, in the exam, you can, I might ask you to give an example of this, but for example, anybody can think of one-to-one communication with one-way anonymity? Anybody? Any of you Catholic? Okay, any of you have friends who are Catholic? Have you ever seen a movie with Catholic? Okay, what do? They go to a confession booth, right? Confession booth is an example of a one-to-one communication with one-way anonymity, right? And a lot of this happens in like medical service as well. I think there's some project we're talking about like healthcare, like consultancy, prevent suicide hotline, that sort of thing. Okay. And there's one-to-N example. For example, a pop-up ad is a one-to-N because it's actually not just you, so many. One-to-many, captive, no feedback. This is where I'm going to focus on. Okay. What do I mean by captive? Okay. Okay. What do you mean by captive? Captive means like this, you know, you're supposedly captive, right? Because as long as I'm showing the movie, you're watching. As long as I'm making a presentation, you are watching. Now, what's non-captive would be something like a passing sign and you walk in, walk out and so forth. Okay. So earlier thing I was talking about, you know, good manners. This is exactly it. Which form of artistic expression takes the form of captive audience? If you're part of a captive audience, there's some certain manner and etiquette expected universally. Doesn't matter where you are. Okay. So captive. Now I said no feedback. Now the feedback and no feedback, that's a little bit of artificial distinction. But you can see that if I'm doing a stand-up comedy, right? And you guys, usually there's a lot of direct feedback. And I take a lot of cue from that. Now with teaching, with music performance, usually you can say it's really non-feedback. It's a little bit indirect. Like a musician can look at the audience and see that the audience is getting bored, so maybe speed up the tempo. I don't know, okay? So there's a little bit of a murky area. But what I'm talking about is scripted or prepared presentation kind of thing, okay? So movies, official broadcast, this is certainly it, okay? In contrast, if you're something like a rock concert, you know, it's mixed in between. Some class is so large, for example, a Zoom class or a video tutorial, that's definitely no feedback, right? That's definitely no feedback. Okay, so this is, I'm not excluding the feedback part. I'm saying I'm focusing on the preparation for that media, okay? So that's a communication topology that we are going to be working with. Now let's think of essence of presentation. Now this is where, again, presentation techniques, I'm not teaching you. This is not a comm art class. So I put in a bracket. But what I'm going to cover in some details that you have to be extremely aware of, because this has design implication. Again, when you're talking about design, you design to enhance the function. You design because you are able to fulfill the function and you have degree of freedom. So you satisfy secondary criteria like aesthetic. Or you design to make sure that there is no negative, holistic feedback to the system. Okay, so those are the design considerations you have to think. So with that, I'm going to say these are the 6 objectives of presentation. Okay, first of all, there's presentation to entertain and amuse. I'm not going to cover that. So like movies, right? There's presentation strictly to inform and narrate. This would be like newscasts or maybe how-to videos, completely just, well, no. How-to video I put in separately. So inform what's happening today, the temperature, the sunset at 6 o'clock, 6:05 at Phuket or something, okay? So pure perform, I'm not gonna cover that. Now, what I'm going to focus on are these 2 objectives. Explain or elaborate. So this will be like tutorial, how-to, manual, class, all this, user manual, okay, video tutorial. And also to sell or propose. So this takes some convincing. So this is where advertisement comes in. Okay. Now, there are more objectives like to convince someone, to prove, to really try to make the person believe when they did not believe before. So this would be something like in a courtroom, for example. I have to convince, right, my presentation to the jury as a public prosecutor is to say, this defendant is guilty, right? My objective to make presentation to the jury as a public defender is to say the defendant is not guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Okay? So there is a convincing, there's a great degree of trying to make you believe in what I believe. Okay, it's not just explaining. Okay, so the criminal trial, I'm not just explaining that this person was carrying a knife. I'm trying to say this person who carried the knife was the one who did the stabbing. That sort of thing. Okay, I'm not going to cover that. Finally, there is a more like convincing in a broad base. And this is something that you should be aware of, although I'm not going to cover in the class here. That's to influence, right? And to incite. You are subject to what's called social engineering. Okay, you don't know this, but people like me, data scientists, get paid decent amount of money to manipulate what you believe. Okay, it's not just what you believe in general, it's what you believe during an election cycle, what you believe during sort of like a sales campaign. Okay, so this is the job of propaganda machine. Okay, this is the job of propaganda to believe that and I tell this to my kid, you know, like let's say what's this thing, Lotus. Okay, the job of the advertisement, and you guys apparently don't pick up on this. Be an individual, right? Everybody wants to be individual. Everyone wants to stand out. What's the solution to standing out? Buy this thing. So I want you to feel, hey, be an individual, stand out. Don't listen to parents. Don't listen to school. Don't listen to traditional. Be your own man. Be your own person. Stand out. Be an individual. Buy this thing like I tell you. You guys don't pick up on this irony. To be an individual, the message is do exactly what I just asked you to do. Now, how good is a campaign? It's a good campaign is one who does it without you noticing it. Right? So when you sort of like, you know, I want to rebel against the parents. Parents say, don't vape, I vape. Well, you actually subscribe to what the vapors say is a cool thing. So you're not being an individual. You're being led by the nose like a cow, right? But you don't know that. That's the cool thing about advertisement. Okay? To lead you by the nose without you feeling that you're being led by the nose. Okay? If you're being led by the nose and it hurts, you're going to rebel. Right? But if they can convince you that you're being led by the nose, you're going to the direction you want to go, then the advertisement has done its job. Anyway, I'm going to focus on these two modes. Okay. Now, let's go to essence of visualization. Okay. Now, this is very important. I want you to remember this concept for your entire Basai career. What is visualization, guys? What's visualization? Visualization is what goes on in your head. Okay? I'm going to tell you 3 bananas plus 2 bananas equal to 5 bananas. Can you visualize 3 bananas and 2 bananas and a sum of 5 bananas in your head? That's what happens in your head. Okay? Now, this is the overall definition of visualization. And so the whole cognitive science, not just this class, not just this module, not just this 15 classes you with us, the whole of visualization is all about this, things in your head. However, we are going to focus on visualization as a tool. So you're not really guaranteed. Now, in the psychology class or cognitive class with Ajahn Sorashai, right? He taught you one of the most important things, which is cognitive bias. That is like the antithesis of what happens in your head. In other words, what happens in your head is not what the communicator intends. I want you to get this picture in your head, but you got this picture in your head because of your cognitive bias, right? So this visualization has some distance to travel. I send this, you receive that because of the cognitive bias. So from here to what happens in your head, that is what cognitive neuroscience is all about. And that's what this class is all about too. However, again, I'm giving you the tools to visualize. So I'm talking about more mechanical things. So in this case, these are the things I'm going to focus on. Definition of visualization. The second visualization is a simulated preview of a real entity or system. This would be like prototype, right? Now, when I make a prototype, okay, think of it this way, yeah? Let's say this is my product, right? If it's a product, it has been productionized, it's produced in batch. It's not made it's not one item custom made. But let's say I'm making the prototype, so I create a plastic model by hand, so that I can pitch this to my potential client. Okay, this is a preview. This is a preview. This has nothing to do with what happened in your head, because what happens in your head may be different because you're too far away, you can't see, you're colorblind. That's where the cognitive bias with Ajahn Sorashai comes into play. Okay, I'm not talking about that part of the visualization. I'm talking about this part, creating a mock-up, creating a preview of something that is a real thing. Okay, so that's one function of a visualization. It's a simulated preview. So when I put this bracket, again, this would be like the blue thing that I mark. This is what I focus on. Okay, so all 3 definitions applies, but I'm focusing on this. Okay, so for example, so this, you have to think of, you know, all this cognitive area and so forth. And this is the most important part of all when it applies to data analytics. So you can think of this as visualization, but this one is very important to me. It's a pictorial rendering of an abstract concept. Let me show you. Okay. Now pay attention, close attention to this, because this is really the crux. An example would be, well, what I'm going to teach you, 3D visualization. Okay. An example would be, in this case, do you guys have friends in economics department? Well, in economics department, you guys know about this supply demand kind of function thing, right? Well, demand supply function is kind of like a two lines that they draw, and you see that. But behind that, you actually have a whole bunch more curves that derive that. Okay. So it's not just conceptual, because people like economists and econometrician literally estimate slope of those lines. And those lines are more complicated. So if your friends are in first year of macroeconomic 101, you have to learn about things like preference money demand curve. Now you can look at the equation, you can draw it by hand, or you can use interactive digital media to visualize. And that's what I'm going to show you. Same thing with Keynesian, ISLM, and so forth. Okay. Same thing with the example I think I mentioned in the first class, and Ajahn Sorachai also mentioned, right? The London tube map. Any of you been to London? No? Okay. London Underground, right? Has a map. Okay. And I think I show you guys maybe 2 videos of why London map is one way and the New York map is another. So okay. So this London map, the way it works, takes into account, well, you guys see this, right? All kinds of things. So the color, right? The connectivity, it's the most efficient way of getting me to plan my trip. Okay. Now, what it doesn't take into account, by the way, is time travel. So this is sort of like, if I were to plan my travel based on minimum number of subway stop and transition from one line to the next, this is perfect. But it doesn't take into account distance. Okay. So maybe in real life, if you take a Waterloo to here, and you take Northern Line to there, and then you take the Central Line to East, you make 3 stops, but it's actually quicker. Whereas if you take a Circle Line from the beginning, you go to Tower Hill all the way to, you don't have to get off the train, so it looks convenient, but it takes a long time, whatever. Okay, so the map is designed to facilitate your travel. Okay, so this is, again, using visualization to explain an abstract concept. Why is it an abstract concept? You going from South Kensington to Liverpool Station, that's not abstract. What is abstract is the connection you make, right? Connectivity between underground. So you guys, eventually you take BTS, right? It's the same kind of thing, same thing, right? So there is an abstract thing in your head that say, this is where I am, this is where I want to go, and the nearest to here is BTS this, BTS that, whatever, and I take this. Now with BTS, you kind of like don't have as many, so you don't have much of a choice. But certainly if you look at something like this, you can go up north and southeast and then whatever. So many complication comes up. So that helps. That is a visualization tool. So when I talk about visualize in this case, I'm not talking about what's happening in your head. Okay, I'm not talking about what's happening in your head. I'm not talking about giving a preview of a system, because you know the train is there already. You don't have to. It's not a model train to look at, right? That's not my point. But my point is, it's an abstract concept. Okay, so these 2 things are extremely important. Okay, so these 2 things is where you can get your not your feet wet, but get your programming hands on. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go over these slides, but very deeply. But why do I separate visualization from data analytics? After all, when you visualize data, it's also a form of abstract information, right? What the difference is this. And this is something that Basai students should know. Doesn't matter which concentration. Okay. Data analytics comes in, let's say, three levels, okay? It's not hard and fast. Data analytics looks like this. On the level 1, if you can plot it, you get a picture. Let me say that again. Let me say again. If you can plot it, if you can visualize it, you get the point. An example would be what? A good example, perfect example. By the way, in your exam, you have to come up with your own example. Okay, I'm going to give you an example that I like the most, and that is carbon concentration in the atmosphere since the industrial age. Now, I'm not going to Google it now. You can Google it on your own time. If you look at carbon dioxide concentration before industrial age and to the industrial age all the way to a few years ago, it hit 400 parts per million, you will see that it's definitely man-made. Okay? You get the picture, right? Do I need to say anything? Right? I just show you, this is a timeline. This is Industrial Revolution in Victorian era. This is your World War I, World War II. This is where you are. This is carbon dioxide concentration in part per million. I show you that picture. Do I need to make any caption? Absolutely not. You get the picture. That is level 1 data analytics. Okay. Now, level 2 data analytics means you have to apply some statistical tools to it, you know, and this is where statistics come in. You have to estimate the mean, the variance, and this and that, and you can make some conclusion. I can make a conclusion that correlation between, I don't know, number of years spent in higher education and amount of salary over the lifetime. I can make this correlation. Is it statistical significant? I have to do some calculation. I can plot it, but just because it looks like there's a positive correlation, you don't know if it's random or not. Okay, so most of data analytics fall into this second group. Finally, third level of data analytics is when you use the data to actually build some kind of predictive AI, machine learning. This is where I come in. Okay, this is where applied digital intelligence focus on. Now, I'm not saying that applied digital intelligence or all my project would use machine learning. I use all three. From look at the picture, you get it, to statistical analysis, gives you information, to create a prediction neural network model. I do all three levels and often in the same project. Okay, but the third part is where, you know, I spend most of my research focus on, obviously. Okay. However, for this class, am I going to go to here and here? No, because this would be my data analytics class, basically. So I'm going to focus on here. Look at it, get the picture. Okay. Is the relationship linear? Is it non-linear? Does it go together? Does it look random? Does it look like a coincidence? Right? Now, when the picture is clear-cut, you don't need to do statistical analysis. I don't need to do statistical modeling to tell you that, yeah, carbon dioxide concentration probably came from human. Okay, I probably don't have to because the line is so drastic. It's so clear. It's clean. There's no noise. It's like this, and then it's like that, right? But if it's random and a little bit of turn, now I need statistical machine. Okay, so I'm gonna go focus on this part of analytics where you look at it, you get the picture. Whether or not that picture has statistical significance, that depends. In some case, you don't need to. Like I said, carbon dioxide concentration in carbon atmosphere. Okay, so that's what I'm going to focus on, right? Now, part 2 I was actually hoping that this is actually the beginning of the after toilet break, but I'm gonna do a little bit of introduction to Mathematica, but I'm just gonna jump into it, okay? Do what's called interactive parametric design. Now, this is, what do I mean by this? It's interactive because, again, with that control, right? You control this and that. But the thing that you're looking at is a preview of a design. So it's not once you design it, okay, let me say it again. Sorry, let me start over. You design something and you want to pitch the design to your client. That's where this kind of preview comes in, right? You create a preview of your product. What I'm talking about is interactive parametric design, which means that the design process itself is interactive. So who's the user? Is it the client? No, it's actually you. So as you are designing, so for example, as I'm designing, I have to choose what? The color of the cap, right? The shape of the bottle, the ratio of the height to the diameter. These are all parameters. So if I'm talking about just visualization, that means I already got the design seal, and I'm just trying to get my client to visualize it. But interactive parametric design means I myself am interactively adjusting the parameter of the design. Hey, let's make it more red. Hey, let's make it more green. How would it look in this light? How would it look in that light? Let's make it longer, shorter, and so forth, right? So I myself, you yourself, not I myself, you yourself are doing the design parametrically. Okay. Now this is possible because of the efficiency of the 3D rendering machine or engine. In the old days, how would you do interactive design? You just draw a lot of sketches, right? And if you want to change, you draw another picture, right? So with interactive parametric design, it's only feasible if you work with digital media, and that's where come in.